Sabrina, what does a shutdown really mean? I mean, in real terms, not the entire government shuts down. It's all essential services, essential personnel, they keep working. Social security checks, they keep going out. Military, they're obviously still working. Post service, the Postal Service, they keep going. But everyone else, it's done.
Anyone who's considered non-essential as an employee, and so that also includes, for example, a lot of the monuments and the national parks.
Yeah.
And frankly, I think that when you look at the politics of the shutdown, it hasn't actually been much of a factor in a recent election cycle. So Democrats, for example, they incurred the blame for shutting down the government in January over Dreamers. It didn't hurt them clearly in the midterms last month. It was in 2013 that Republicans shut the government down over Obamacare, and they still had a very strong 2014 midterm election year. So really, the people who are going to be hurt most by this are not the politicians, but the American people. I think that what this ultimately comes down to is whether the president is willing to just accept funding toward border security more broadly, or is he specifically going to demand that those funds be allocated toward the border wall, which is, of course, a non-starter with Democrats. But the one thing that tends to push lawmakers in the direction of a compromise? It's skipping town for the holidays.
Yes, exactly. When they smell the jet fumes, that's when a deal is always struck. But Donald Trump has proven in the past, Emily, that he can flip the script. Conventional norms, throw him out the window. Can he successfully flip the script on this? Because typically we would say, let's shut the government down is not something you would ever hear from a politician or a president.
No, it feels like we don't even really know where the politics are right now. I mean, it was just months ago that it was considered bad to take ownership of shutting down the government. Yeah. And Trump was saying it very proudly. I think people that are totally missing out of this conversation, which will dictate how we understand it moving forward to the politics of it, are Republican leadership. They're not making deals with Democrats. They're not making deals within their own ranks behind closed doors between the House and the Senate. They weren't even invited into that conversation, and we're not even asking the question why they're not, because Trump is so much in charge of this. And one of the real reactions that we saw of this election, Democrats having such a huge wave, was that the message that Republicans can't govern. This does not help them when they're not even in the conversations with Trump. And they really don't know what path is moving forward at all.
But I guess in a Republican leader's defense, what should they do? Because Donald Trump, he could undercut them in a tweet in a second. I mean, we have seen that. And do you think that's what the silence is about?
I think, first of all, that triumvirate of Pelosi, Trump, and Schumer was pretty fun to watch, and it was extraordinary in what was going on. And I think if the government shuts down, you're going to learn a couple things. First of all, the non-government, the non-essential, there's so many of them that people are going to say, wow, we can cut the government in half and still move on. And I think when Obama stuck it in everyone's eyes and said, I'm going to close the government and I'm not going to let you into our parks. If Trump were smart, he said, we're closing the government. You don't have to worry. You're going to get your Social Security checks. And you know what? The parks are open. Parks are open. You may not be able to get inside the monument, but wander all you want. And people will realize that it's not as bad as they think it is.
So you're pro-government shutdown?
No, I'm not pro-government shutdown, but if it happens, go ahead and do it, and you can spin it the right way. And on immigration, what he said the other day was it's worth securing our borders for a lot of reasons. Take the drugs and all that stuff, but also take that little girl who died, right? She died because they came in here illegally, and they went through that whole route, and it did it the wrong way. And unfortunately, he can take that as well and say, this is what it's all about. This is why I'm willing to go the distance.
I just, as a human being, I think it is impossible. I think it is ill-advised, and look, I've been wrong a million times. I think it's ill-advised to say we should let the government shut down. They should be forced to figure this out. It is a basic task of government, Congress specifically, to fund the functions of the government and figure it out. I don't understand why everyone continues to. Are we ever going to get to a point where they stop adding pet projects? You can say it's essential, but it doesn't need to be in this bill. They could have a long debate over the border wall, separate and apart from keeping the government open.
Sure. But honestly, this is what I say that Republicans are proving they can't govern. They've literally one job. Like, keep the government open. They literally one job, and they can't agree to keep it running even for a couple of weeks at the same spending level.
Is that what's going to happen, do you think, in the end? I mean, you've lived through a shutdown on Capitol Hill.
There'll be a short-term deal, and then it will be on the Democrats to work with Trump in some fashion. But use the term "flip the script," and here's how the script has been flipped. And as Sabrina alluded to with the last shutdown, in 2013, we talked about having that shutdown be a touch the stove moment, that Republican members would touch the stove, realize it's hot. Yes, we thought that these members were children, and they wouldn't want to do it again. The reality is, if there's no political penalty to play, then Republicans and Democrats are going to continue to go down this road because they can get away with it.
And just one thing real quickly is just because someone's work is non-essential in terms of when you have a shutdown, them being placed on furlough, that doesn't mean that it's not important. I mean, these are people who work at agencies like the FAA. This includes a lot of people who work at the State Department and who are working on critical matters of national security and just keeping basic government functions running. I think that this is also coming at a time when these people need paychecks because it's the holidays, and so they would face considerable, of course, they face considerable challenges at home if they were placed on furlough.
But nobody cares about the bureaucrat. They don't. And the FAA, the air traffic controls there, so the average American isn't affected by it.
But that doesn't mean we dismiss or downplay the impact of those people potentially being placed on furlough. And that also, of course, is in addition to what economic forecasters say would be, of course, considerable impact on the U.S. government if it were to shut down.
If they kick the can, as we love to say, down the road, and then it will likely land right in Nancy Pelosi's lap. Is that a good thing or a bad thing if this funding fight lands in her lap when she likely becomes the next speaker?
Well, it really changes the dynamics here, and that, I think, is the strength that she was showing in that meeting and said quite directly. That the whole conversation the entire time for the last 2 years has been, what is Donald Trump willing to do? And to some degree, that's still true, right? Like, that's how you negotiate bills. That's how you negotiate their conduct. What is the president willing to do? But because he is so unpredictable, you really can change the narrative and the dynamics around negotiations. And she went in there saying, I'm holding a hard line. We're not going to fund the border. Continue with discussions. Like, now this is your new jumping off point. And actually, it has become the new jumping off point. So she is really showing how hard she can come in on those negotiations.
We've seen this movie before, and I am just hoping, as we've discussed...
Don't expect a different ending.
Well, this is what I'm hoping. Is this like it's always the darkest before the dawn type of scene we're seeing play out? Or are we just watching a slow-motion car crash, as we have done many times in 2018? We'll all find out together. Stand by, guys. Still ahead, our last show of 2018 means it's time to take stock and start looking ahead to the politics of 2019. That is next. Nancy Pelosi there talking about that big victory in 2018. That victory will bring a record number of women to Congress and will likely return the gavel to the first ever woman Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi. So looking back at everything that has happened this year, if it's even possible, is that who won the year? The panel is back with me. Okay, so I ask you all who won 2018, and you all individually, each one of you comes back and tells me basically a version of the same thing, that women won the year. Emily, why?
I feel great about that. I'm so pleased that you all said that. I feel great about
She's grinning ear to ear. Why?
Women did win the year. I think, again, I can't remember everything that happened in this year. It feels like it's
no one
10
can.
years.
No one can.
But when we think about the big moments of this year, and even the kind of smaller moments, when we think about women in power, first we were talking, I mean, the year started with the Women's March. It was women saying, we are here. And we have a very strong reaction to all the things that Trump was elected in spite of, particularly like the Access Hollywood tapes and treatment of women in general. And then women kept running for office. Some of the facts that we talk about with women running for office actually weren't true this year. Like, generally, you say that you have to ask a woman 7 times before she's willing to run for office. That actually wasn't true this year. Women are stepping forward and saying, it's going to be me this time. I'm not going to wait for someone to ask me. And then we saw over and over during the campaigns, they had to continuously overcome things that women deal with in life every day. But now they were asking for power, and so it was very different. Things like, can your job, your campaign, pay for child care? That was a huge win. If you are nursing, can you bring your baby to the floor for a vote if you are a U.S. senator? Can you get to the bathroom that's close to when you're voting? Like, those are things that women, these are, I think in the past we would have considered them identity politics issues, but when women are actually in power and at the table, you have to consider them part of their job, economic issues, and it's a serious part of how they can actually get it done every day.
Doug, you said one woman specifically won the year, Nancy Pelosi. Why?
She put a plan together, raised a ton of money for Democrats, and ultimately was successful on Election Day and is very well poised, especially given the meeting with Trump just this week, to become the next Speaker of the House. It's a huge win for Nancy Pelosi. And I agree with a lot of what Emily said. The one thing I would note, though, is it came at a big cost for a lot of Republican women. There are a lot of really good Republican members of Congress who lost either trying to run for Senate or governor or re-election in their House seats. Republican House women were decimated by this election. Great result for Democrats, but not for Republicans.
And that is why, thank you for the tee-up, why I'm so confused, Rob Astorino. How can the winner, yeah, you always do. How can the winner of the year be both Democratic women and Donald Trump? Those two things are mutually exclusive. exclusive.
No, but yeah, I'm separating it. Politics, women won the year. They won seats, in Arizona, Minnesota, all over the place. And Republicans, women lost seats. But governmentally, Donald Trump and the Republicans had a very good year, whether it was a Supreme Court pick, whether it was very recently the prison sentencing reform, which is very, very big. Yes, the announcement this past week that got almost no attention through HUD is a flood of money, private sector money, going into inner cities. So you add up the victories governmentally that Trump, because he's the head of the party, really, Trump had, and I think it's both.
Sabrina, how do you square... When you talk about, when you see, you didn't even mention the economy first. You didn't even mention the economy first. See, you need to talk to Donald Trump about that because he doesn't do it either. Sabrina, you mentioned the Supreme Court. How do you square 2018 being the year of the woman and the Brett Kavanaugh confirmation mess that was a mess? How do you square these two things happening at once?
Well, I think that there's a lot more ways to go when it comes to the Me Too movement, but you can't deny that in many ways that movement was born out of the election of Donald Trump, which served as a catalyst for many of these women to actually outwardly seek elected office for the first time, rather than having to be corralled into weighing whether they could have a viable campaign and career in public office. And so you had, on election night alone, more than 100 women who were elected to Congress. There were 92 in the House. There were 10 in the Senate. And then obviously in the weeks that followed, you had many more women whose races were called in their favor. So that does change the makeup of how, for example, a Brett Kavanaugh confirmation battle might look like in the future if Congress was once again dealing with, for example, a nominee who has allegations of sexual misconduct. But certainly, yes, that was a low point for, I think, the Me Too movement. But part of why it's so important that there are going to be more women at the table is because they will now be in a position where they are making some of these decisions. And it fundamentally changes how the legislative body views both issues and people who come before them who are there to serve in some of the highest positions in this government.
Absolutely. I mean, go ahead, Brett.
I was going to say, keep in mind the last quote-unquote year of the woman was 1992, where you saw an influx of Democratic female candidates who were successful, a direct reaction to the Clarence Thomas hearing. So very similar to what we saw this year.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
Both unfounded, by the way.
We're not going into that right now. You can stop right now. One thing that surprised me is that no one mentioned Robert Mueller. Why is Robert Mueller not the person who won the year? Does no one remember the Russia investigation anymore? Is that what it is?
Because he doesn't talk.
And he doesn't
very smartly.
Because he doesn't talk.
Elusive. We didn't even think about him.
But what about...
This has been a very consequential year for the Mueller investigation. And I think in particular last week's court filings around Michael Cohen, and I think the cooperation of the president's longtime personal attorney, that has certainly been one of the larger turning points in this investigation, both for what we saw in terms of the violation of campaign finance law, as well as what he has revealed for some of the conversations that were happening between associates of then candidate Trump and Moscow, well into the point when he was almost the nominee.
And it all does come down to, what does Robert Mueller produce? What does Robert Mueller come up with? And how much of it does the public learn? That leads me to 2019. If Russia was one of the big stories of 2018, which I think we can all agree that it was, is Russia the story of 2019? Because it's not over yet. I love this. Did you see that? Yes, absolutely not.
Yeah, I mean, it's not even close to over. It does feel like he's getting closer, and that's where the report will come and the big indictments will come.
That's true.
One of the things that really, truly does worry me is that the president using his position and cutting down the media and cutting down the investigation at the same time in concert really will lead to whatever comes out of the Mueller investigation as being discounted by so much of his base as not true just because it's about the president. That really, really does worry me, honestly, for like the health of democracy.
Well, that's why I think
Bill Clinton did that. It was the same thing Bill
Clinton
did.
I will say, maybe I guess it's left for everyone to decide then on their own if the winner or loser of 2018 is the media, even though I don't even like to do media stories. One thing I can promise you for sure, though, is the only thing that is certain is one thing you can look forward to in 2019 is the beginning of the 2020 election.
Yes.
So we leave that for all of you. Yes, we're already back there again. Thank you, everybody. It's great to see you. That's the State of America this week. Be sure to listen to our podcast. You can subscribe at Apple Podcasts or your favorite app. We will see you back here in the new year. Happy holidays, everybody.